Inflammation. What is it? And is it something you should worry about? Let's talk about that. How's it going, guys? I'm Richie Kirwan, and today we're going to talk about probably one of the biggest buzzwords in the health and fitness world: inflammation. We'll talk about what it is, what it does in your body, how it happens, and what you can do to make sure it's not a problem for you. This may come as a surprise, but we need inflammation to survive. Inflammation is a vital process in the body that we need to keep everything working exactly as it should. You see, inflammation is part of our body's immune system, and because of that, our immune cells, like macrophages, neutrophils, and lymphocytes, play a major role in starting it and controlling it. We use inflammation to help us fight infection from bacteria and viruses, and we also use it to help repair tissues that are stressed, injured, or damaged. A classic example of this is what happens when you exercise. Every time you exercise, this induces a small inflammatory response in your muscles, and this inflammation is absolutely essential for exercise adaptation and muscle growth. We even have studies showing that if young, healthy people take high doses of anti-inflammatory medicines like ibuprofen, it reduces muscle growth over a period of 8 weeks. So, if inflammation is so important, why do we hear so many bad things about it online? Well, the thing is, we can divide the inflammatory response into two main types. The first type is what we call the acute inflammatory response, and it means a response that happens right now over a short period of time. A good example of this is if you get a splinter in your finger. That splinter will cause tissue damage and probably introduce some bacteria into the area around it. Your body will send immune cells, which will start the inflammatory response. The area around the wound will probably get red and warm because part of the inflammatory response is increased blood flow to a particular area of the body to bring more immune cells. This acute response is usually really short-lived and can be over in a matter of hours or days, and it's usually localized to the area around the wound. It kills the bacteria and helps repair the damaged tissue, and once that happens, the immune system helps to control the inflammation and bring the area around the wound back to normal. It's pretty similar to what happens when we exercise, and it's a perfect example of what your body can do and how cool it really is. The other type of inflammation, however, is called chronic systemic inflammation. Chronic means it goes on continuously for a long time without being properly controlled by the immune system. And systemic means that its effect is spread out over a lot of the body and isn't localized to a small area like a wound or a muscle after exercise. Chronic systemic inflammation can be a problem because elevated levels of markers of inflammation in the blood are linked with a lot of chronic diseases like atherosclerosis, which is a type of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, asthma, inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and even cancer. But before we talk about how our lifestyle affects inflammation, we need to know how inflammation is measured, and that brings up a bit of a problem. You see, inflammation is controlled by signaling chemicals in our body called cytokines, and there are a lot of different cytokines that are thought to be pro-inflammatory. Most studies that investigate inflammation measure a number of different cytokines or markers of inflammation, which means it can be sometimes really difficult to compare studies if they use different markers. That said, some of the most common inflammatory markers that are measured in research are substances like C-reactive protein, CRP, tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha, and interleukins, especially interleukin 6 or IL-6. But the truth is, there are so many more, and the markers can even be specific to specific conditions, like rheumatoid factor in rheumatoid arthritis and monocyte chemoattractant protein, MCP1, in heart disease. You don't need to know all of these, but it's good to know that there are lots which can make comparing research a little bit harder. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how our lifestyle, and especially our diet, can affect chronic inflammation. So, most people want to know if specific foods cause inflammation, and the answer is no, but. Let's use a few examples here. Nightshades, for example, are a group of vegetables that include tomatoes, aubergine, potatoes, and peppers, and they get a lot of bad press from some people in the wellness industry who claim that they cause inflammation. The thing is, if you look at the scientific research on nightshades, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. In one trial of 106 female students who were overweight or obese, participants were given either 330 ml per day of tomato juice or water for 20 days. At the end, the group drinking the tomato juice showed lower levels of inflammatory markers, specifically IL-6, IL-8, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, depending on their degree of overweight or obesity. On top of that, a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, which combined and analyzed the results of 7 studies with 465 participants, found that while eating tomatoes didn't reduce CRP or IL-6, it can reduce TNF-alpha. One of the possible reasons for this is that tomatoes are rich in lycopene, a polyphenol that has powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Even potatoes, which get so much bad press these days, don't seem to be a problem for inflammation. In a 6-week study, they gave men 150 grams of either cooked white potatoes, yellow potatoes, or purple potatoes once per day and measured blood levels of a number of markers of inflammation. After the 6 weeks, the levels of inflammation didn't increase, and in fact, levels of CRP were significantly lower in the group eating the purple potatoes. Levels of oxidative damage were also lower in the groups eating yellow and purple potatoes compared to the white potatoes. Again, probably due to the higher levels of polyphenols in the more colourful spuds. Now, earlier when I said specific foods don't cause inflammation, I also said but. The thing is, that's the truth in the vast majority of people. But some people just don't react well to certain foods, and that can be for a number of reasons like allergies or intolerances. And if you know that you don't react well to a certain food, for example, if it causes you stomach pain or you notice a rash developing after you eat it, avoid these foods and speak to your GP. But that doesn't mean that that is going to be a problem for everyone else. So in most cases, if it's not specific foods that are causing issues with inflammation, what's the actual culprit? Well, that's a much more complicated question. But in essence, a big part of the problem is probably the overall dietary pattern that people follow these days. Almost 60% of the calories eaten in countries like the UK and the United States come from ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. Now, eating some UPFs isn't going to automatically cause inflammation, but we do know that eating more UPFs can lead to eating more calories overall, and more calories overall leads to weight gain. You see, higher levels of body fat actually lead to stress in our adipose or fatty tissue, usually due to a lack of delivery of oxygen to the tissue. This stress triggers the beginning of an inflammatory response that doesn't come under control as long as body fat levels are still high. This chronic systemic inflammation leads to major problems like insulin resistance and diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and heart disease. We also have a lot of studies that show that intentional weight loss actually leads to drops in inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and IL-6, and even leads to increases in anti-inflammatory markers like adiponectin. Interestingly, doing a high-fat, low-carb diet or a high-carb, low-fat diet doesn't have any effect on the benefits of weight loss. No matter if someone is eating lots of carbs or lots of fat, if they lose body weight, they'll reduce their markers of inflammation. So, instead of it being the consumption of specific foods, it may actually be the overconsumption of food in general that leads to increases in body fat and markers of inflammation. Losing excess body weight is one way to effectively reduce levels of chronic inflammation. But on top of the extra calories that people get from UPFs, you also need to consider what they're not getting in their diet. And generally, diets that are higher in processed and ultra-processed foods are lower in whole foods like fruit, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes. These foods are full of beneficial nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, fiber, and polyphenols, which may actually help lower our body's inflammation levels. These foods are full of beneficial nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, fiber, and polyphenols, which may actually help our bodies to control inflammation levels. This is why dietary patterns that are high in whole foods, like I just mentioned, are often associated with lower levels of inflammation. All of these nutrients affect inflammation in different ways. Essential fatty acids, for example, are directly involved in anti-inflammatory or resolvin cascades that actually help to reduce the inflammatory process. Polyphenols is a wide group of substances, but some of the ways that they can affect inflammation is by activating the body's own antioxidant defense systems, which brings inflammation down. Dietary fiber might reduce inflammation by helping people with weight loss, by helping people feel fuller and eat less overall, and by promoting a healthier gut microbiome, leading to less production of markers of inflammation in the gut. So as you can see, what you're not eating can also have a big impact on levels of inflammation. So making sure you get plenty of nutrient-dense whole foods, especially whole plant foods, is a very healthy dietary approach. This goes hand in hand with eating less ultra-processed and refined foods, which tend to be devoid of those beneficial nutrients and really just provide calories. Now, just before I finish up, it's worth pointing out there are other non-diet lifestyle factors that can influence inflammation too, and one of the most important ones is regular exercise. Like I said earlier, immediately after a bout of exercise, we normally see a short-term increase in markers of inflammation, but in the long term, higher levels of exercise are associated with lower levels of chronic or long-term inflammation. Now, some of that effect is probably caused by exercise leading to lower levels of body fat, but there is plenty of evidence to suggest that the metabolic effect of exercise, especially at higher intensities, and especially a mixture of cardio and strength training, seems to have the biggest effect on lowering inflammation. So if we're going to summarize everything we've just discussed, here are some of the key points for avoiding chronic inflammation. Maintain a healthy body weight, or specifically avoiding excess body fat. Control calorie intake and avoid excess, especially excess ultra-processed foods. Focus on nutrient-dense whole foods rich in vitamins, minerals, essential fats, fiber, and polyphenols. Basically eat lots of colorful plants. Avoid foods you know you have a definite negative reaction to, like allergies. Get plenty of regular exercise, including cardio and resistance exercise. For the vast majority of people, following an all-round healthy lifestyle is exactly what you need to do to avoid excess inflammation. So, should you focus on trying to reduce inflammation with your diet? Absolutely not. You don't need to. Just eat well. Now, obviously, I haven't covered everything to do with food, diet, and inflammation. It's a huge topic with lots of nuances, especially how it relates to individuals instead of the general population. But I do hope this video has given you a much better understanding of inflammation and diet. As always, if you have any more questions, let me know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to the Myprotein YouTube channel for more great evidence-based nutrition information.